My family mocked my hobby of fixing old cars. When they asked what I'd leave them, I took them to the garage, where a collector bought my restored Mustang for $200,000 cash. I've always believed that everyone needs a quiet corner of the world where they can breathe. Some people go fishing, some knit. My sister, Carol, collects ceramic frogs that all look exactly the same to me, but apparently have very different personalities. Me? I fix old cars. Not because I'm some grease-covered genius from a movie montage. I just like the peace of it. There's something calming about taking apart a piece of metal that's been ignored for decades and bringing it back to life. It's like therapy, but cheaper. Well, depending on the car. The funny thing is, when people picture a car hobbyist, they usually don't imagine a 60-something woman with silver-streaked hair, bifocals that constantly slide down her nose, and a bad habit of wiping greasy hands on her jeans. But that's me. I'm not glamorous, I'm not fancy. I'm just stubborn, curious, and a little too comfortable spending Saturday nights with an engine block instead of Netflix. But my family? Oh, they loved to tease me for it. Sometimes lightly, sometimes not so lightly. They'd call it Mum's weird old lady hobby, or Aunt Maggie's midlife hobby that never ended. I'd laugh most of it off, but sometimes deep down, it stung more than I'd admit. Because they didn't see what I saw. They saw rust. I saw potential. They saw wasted time. I saw memories waiting to be rebuilt. And every time they joked about how I'd probably leave them boxes of bolts in my will, I'd smile politely and pretend it didn't annoy the hell out of me. The car that started it all was a 1968 Mustang Fastback I found sitting in a neighbor's yard when I was 43. Back then, life was heavier. My marriage was in its final stretch. My kids were busy building their own lives, and I felt like I'd slipped into the background of everything. That Mustang was the first thing in years that made me feel excited. Everyone said it was a pointless project. The car was half chewed by rust. The engine didn't even cough when we tried to crank it, and the interior smelled like some kind of rodent apocalypse. But I bought it anyway. Over the years, I picked up other cars, little projects, big projects, some quick, some years long. But that Mustang, that one was special. It was the one I kept tucked in the very back of the garage under a big grey cover like a sleeping dragon. It was the one I worked on whenever I needed to think, or not think. And even though I wasn't quite finished with it, I promised myself one day I would restore it perfectly. Fast forward to last Thanksgiving. Now, family gatherings in my house were always loud, chaotic, and filled with the kind of teasing that toes the line between playful and borderline rude. That day, my two kids, my sister, and her twin teenagers all sat around my dining table, chatting about everything except anything that actually mattered. The mashed potatoes were lumpy, they always are when I make them, and the turkey was slightly overcooked, but everyone pretended it wasn't. We're polite in that dysfunctional way. At some point after dessert, the conversation shifted to the future. Not the sentimental, where do you see yourself in 10 years future, but the practical, uncomfortable one. Wills, belongings, estates, the kind of talk that always makes me want to hide in the garage with my sockets set. They meant well, I guess, but I could tell they were more curious about what I'd leave behind than they were about how I was actually doing. They'd been dropping hints for years that I should sell the cars and enjoy my retirement, which always made me wonder what they thought I was spending my time doing now. Hard labor? Corporate meetings? No. I spend my mornings with coffee and my afternoons with carburetors. Trust me, I'm enjoying myself. But that night, my son, Jason, leaned back in his chair and said, "Mum, you know, the cars are cool and all, but you can't take them with you. You've got to think about who gets what eventually. His tone wasn't mean, but it wasn't exactly thoughtful either. My daughter, Emily, chimed in. Yeah, Mum. You've got what, 7 of them now? Or 8? I lost count. We don't mind helping you decide who gets which. I'll take the red one. Jason can have the blue one. Carol laughed harder than she should have and said, Make sure you leave me that dusty sewing box in the garage, the one that weighs 50 pounds. I bet it's full of nuts and bolts. They all chuckled. And there it was, that familiar twinge under my ribs. That feeling of being misunderstood, dismissed, like I was some quirky grandma who played with metal while the rest of the world moved on. I smiled, though. I didn't want to dampen the mood. But then something in me shifted. I don't know if it was the weeks of aching joints, the grey hair I'd plucked that morning, or maybe just the way they were all talking about my life, as if it were a storage unit waiting to be emptied. Whatever it was, I suddenly felt very tired of being underestimated. Actually, I said, setting down my fork, why don't I show you what you'll inherit someday? They blinked at me like I'd just announced we were all taking a trip to Mars. Emily asked if I was serious. I nodded. So the whole crew followed me outside like a parade of confused ducks. The evening was crisp, and the sun had just dipped behind the trees, leaving a faint pink glow along the horizon. My garage light flickered on as I pulled up the door. The familiar smell of oil, old rubber, and metal filled the air. I loved that smell. It smelled like comfort, like home. But they didn't see what I saw. Not yet. My cars sat under individual covers, neatly arranged in 2 rows. Tools were organized on pegboards along the walls. A workbench stood in the corner, wiped clean from earlier. And under the biggest cover, tucked all the way at the back, waited the Mustang. My family stood there awkwardly, expecting me to pull back some random cover and show them a half-finished mess that proved their point. But I walked right past all of them and went to the Mustang. I lifted the cover dramatically. Yes, I'll admit it, I was feeling theatrical. And there it was. Glossy red paint, chrome accents glittering under the fluorescent lights, the interior fully restored in black leather, and that unmistakable Mustang silhouette that still makes my heart skip. Emily let out a small gasp. Mum, when did you finish it? I smiled. Last month. Jason walked closer, touching the smooth paint with the same care he used to use on his pet hamster when he was 8. It looks brand new. Carol's twins started whispering to each other like they were staring at treasure. But I wasn't done. A moment later, headlights swept across the driveway. Everyone turned as a sleek black collector's truck pulled up, followed by a man in a crisp jacket stepping out. You called earlier, he asked me. About seeing the fastback. My family froze. I nodded. Come on in. He walked straight to the Mustang, inspected it like someone evaluating a diamond, then turned to me with a grin. It's immaculate. The engine work alone. I can tell you put years into this. I'll take it. Emily's mouth fell open. Jason looked like he forgot how to blink. Even Carol suddenly stopped breathing. The man reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. He handed it to me. 200,000. Cash, just as discussed. I didn't even open it. I just nodded and thanked him while he arranged for his team to load the car. My family stood there in stunned silence as the Mustang, my Mustang, was rolled out of the garage like a crowned queen. When the truck disappeared down the street, I finally turned to them. So, I said softly, next time you joke about my little hobby, remember that it's worth a little more than rusty bolts. Their faces were priceless. And that moment, that sweet moment, was only the beginning of what would unfold next. After the Mustang rolled away into the night, the garage felt strangely empty. For years, that car had been my companion, my project, my distraction when life felt too big or too small. Letting it go wasn't easy, even with $200,000 in my hand, but I felt a surprising sense of closure. It was like releasing something I'd been holding on to for far too long. My kids didn't understand that part yet. They were still stuck on the fact that their mother, who they once asked to please stop hoarding junk, had just sold a car for more than the price of a house in some states. We all walked back inside, and the atmosphere felt different, softer, quieter. Jason kept glancing at the envelope on the kitchen table like it was radioactive. Emily, normally quick with jokes, seemed unusually thoughtful. Even Carol, who could talk non-stop from sunrise to midnight, stayed silent for almost a full minute, which I'm pretty sure broke some natural law. Finally, Emily spoke. "Mum, why didn't you tell us the Mustang was worth that much?" I shrugged. "It wasn't when I bought it. And I didn't restore it to sell. I restored it because I loved it." Jason leaned forward. "But still, you should have at least mentioned it." I raised an eyebrow. "And listened to you all telling me to sell it sooner? Or questioning every tool I bought? No thanks." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He knew I was right. For years, I'd been the family's reliable background character. I cooked holiday meals, babysat kids, listened to everyone's problems, and quietly worked on my projects. I wasn't supposed to have a passion that was valuable. I wasn't supposed to be impressive. At least, not in their minds. But now they were looking at me like they were meeting me for the first time. We returned to the dining room, where half-eaten pie and cold gravy still sat on the table. Carol finally found her voice. "So what are you going to do with all that money?" I almost laughed. Everyone was thinking the same thing but didn't want to say it. They wondered if I'd leave more to them now that I'd made a small fortune. I didn't blame them. Money does weird things to people. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. I didn't expect him to offer that much. I had known the car was valuable. The make, the year, the rare parts. Those weren't secrets. But the collector had been more enthusiastic than I expected, insisting he'd been searching for that exact model in that exact condition for years. When he saw the care I put into the restoration, he paid more than book value without blinking. Emily tapped her fingers against her water glass. "So, are you going to keep fixing cars? Or was this like a finale?" "Oh, I'm definitely going to keep fixing cars," I said. "I'm not dead yet." That made Jason laugh for the first time that night. Fair. But then his expression turned thoughtful. "Mum, I guess we never realized how serious you were about all this." I leaned back in my chair, suddenly aware of how tired I felt, not physically but emotionally. "You don't have to understand my hobby," I said softly, "but I wish you all respected it a little more." Nobody said anything for a moment. The kids exchanged glances, and for once they looked guilty instead of entertained. "Mom," Emily said, "we didn't mean to make fun of something important to you." "I know," I replied, "but that doesn't mean it didn't hurt sometimes." Even Carol, who was usually as delicate as a bulldozer, cleared her throat and said, "We're sorry. Really." I nodded. I believed them. Families mess up. People say things without thinking. Hearts get bruised. That's part of living and loving each other. But apologies matter. And that night, their apologies felt real. After everyone left, The house was quiet again, and I finally exhaled. I made myself some tea and stood by the window, watching the empty spot in the driveway where the Mustang had been. It felt strange, like looking at a missing tooth with your tongue. A little sad, a little freeing. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. Maybe it was excitement, maybe nerves, maybe the leftover adrenaline from last night, but I felt wide awake. I tied my hair back, pulled on my favorite old denim jacket, and went out to the garage. Even with one car missing, the place still felt like mine. Warm, familiar, cluttered in a way only I understood. I touched the remaining covers gently, like checking in on old friends. There was my '72 Nova, which still needed a carburetor rebuild. My '84 F-150, which ran perfectly but needed new paint. And my '66 Beetle, which I'd bought as a joke, but now loved more than I expected. I walked to the workbench, ran my hand along the line of wrenches, and inhaled the comforting smell of oil and dusty concrete. Then I saw the envelope on the corner of the bench. I opened it slowly this time, letting the feelings sink in. 20 stacks of bundled cash stared back at me. It didn't feel real. It looked like something from a movie. I wasn't used to this level of wealth. I'd worked paycheck to paycheck for most of my life, raising kids, paying bills, fixing what needed to be fixed. I'd never been irresponsible with money, but I'd never had this kind of cushion. Suddenly, the possibilities stretched out before me like a road with no end. I could travel. I could move. I could build the dream garage I always joked about. I could buy a car I never thought I'd be able to afford. Or, I realized with a laugh, I could do absolutely nothing different and still be perfectly happy. But then my phone rang. It was Jason. "Morning, Mum," he said, sounding oddly cheerful. "Hey, listen, I've been thinking about your cars." "Oh boy," I muttered. "What now?" He laughed. "No, not like that. I wanted to ask if you'd teach me a little about how to fix things. I mean, you rebuilt a Mustang by yourself. That's incredible. I think it'd be cool to learn." I blinked. Jason had never shown interest in anything that didn't involve computers, streaming shows, or fantasy football. "You're serious?" I asked. "Yeah. I mean, I don't want to start with something crazy. Maybe just oil changes or brakes. Whatever's easy. I never realized how much patience and skill it takes. And I want to know you better. You know?" For a moment, I didn't say anything. My throat tightened a little, and I had to smile. "Sure," I said. "We can start this weekend." After we hung up, I sat at the workbench for a long time, staring at the metal parts spread out in front of me. I thought about how unexpected life is. You spend years feeling invisible, and then one moment changes everything, not because you planned it, but because life finally reveals something it had been hiding. Later that afternoon, Emily drove over too. She brought me a large latte with my name spelled wrong on the cup, something she'd done since college. "I was thinking," she said as she wandered into the garage, "maybe you could teach me something too. I don't want Jason to get all the fun." I chuckled. "What exactly do you want to learn?" She shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe how to spot a good project car, or how not to get ripped off when buying one, or maybe I just want to hang out with you more." I handed her a spare pair of gloves. "Then you can start by helping me move the Nova's hood. It weighs a ton." She groaned dramatically. "I regret this already." And just like that, the garage, my quiet place, started becoming something else. Not just my retreat, but a space where my family and I could finally meet in the middle. Not through jokes, not through assumptions, but through shared hours, shared messes, and shared stories. But the real twist came a week later. And trust me, it changed everything even more than the $200,000 Mustang sale. The week after the Mustang sale felt unusually lively. My phone rang more than usual, mostly from Jason and Emily checking in or sending me links to car parts they thought I might need. Half of the parts weren't even for models I owned, but I didn't correct them. Their excitement was sweet, and honestly, the attention felt good. For years, they'd been so wrapped up in their own lives that they'd only called when something was wrong or when they needed a recipe I knew by heart. But now they were calling just because, and I wasn't about to complain. On Saturday morning, Jason showed up right on time, something he had never accomplished in his entire childhood. He wore brand new work gloves and a spotless mechanic's jacket that still had the store creases in it. I almost laughed out loud. "You look like you're about to film a commercial," I said, stepping aside as he walked in. He grinned. "Well, if I'm going to do this, I want to look the part." "You'll look the part when your hands are dirty," I replied. "Give it 10 minutes. He inspected the garage like it was some sacred museum. I could tell he'd seen it before, but never really looked. The organized chaos of tools, the labeled drawers, the posters of old car diagrams, the grease stains on the concrete. This space held 2 decades of my time. "So," he said, rubbing his hands together, "what's first? Oil change, spark plugs?" I pointed to the Nova. "First, you're learning how to safely lift a car. Because if you don't, you'll kill yourself before we even get to the oil." Jason nodded with the seriousness of a surgeon, and I'll admit it, I felt a tiny burst of pride watching him. We spent the next hour going over the basics. Jack placement, safety stands. Why you never trust a hydraulic jack alone? He asked 100 questions, even took notes, which was hilarious, considering he used to roll his eyes at me for making lists. At one point he said, "Mum, I honestly thought this was just turning bolts and cleaning stuff." "Oh, sweetie," I said. "This is half physics, half patience, and half stubbornness." "That's 3 halves." "Exactly." He laughed, and his laughter filled the garage in a way the Mustang never had. Just as we got the Nova lifted, Emily drove up, music blasting from her car. She walked in with iced coffee and sunglasses like she'd arrived at a beach instead of a grease-filled garage. She pushed up her sunglasses and said, "Okay, I know nothing about cars, so assign me something that won't kill me." I pointed to the vacuum. "You can clean the interior. It's impossible to mess that up." She wrinkled her nose. "You say that like you know me." Within 30 minutes, Jason was elbow deep in learning how to loosen a drain plug without splattering oil everywhere, and Emily was vacuuming the Nova's dusty seats while yelling, "Why is there so much dirt in here? Who sat in this car, Bigfoot?" It was messy, chaotic, and loud. And it was one of the best afternoons I'd had in years. We ordered pizza, sat on overturned buckets, and talked about things we hadn't talked about in a long time. Jason admitted he'd been struggling with work stress. Emily shared that she'd been feeling lonely after a breakup she hadn't wanted to tell anyone about. I told them about the nights fixing the Mustang when I'd felt invisible. They listened. Really listened. And in that moment, surrounded by greasy tools and half-finished projects, I realized something. The garage wasn't just a place where I fixed cars. It was a place where I could fix the things I thought were lost. Time, connection, even parts of myself. But the following Friday, brought a surprise I never expected. Around noon, I got a letter in the mail. Thick envelope, no return address. I opened it while standing by the kitchen counter, expecting maybe a warranty or junk mail. Instead, I found a handwritten note and an old photograph. The note said, "I heard you sold the '68 Fastback. Congratulations. I thought you might want the chance to finish what you started years ago. If you're interested, meet me tomorrow at 10 a.m. LH." I stared at the initials. LH. My heart gave a sudden jump. There was only one person those initials could belong to: Louis Harper. 25 years earlier, Louis had been the one who convinced me I could restore the Mustang in the first place. He was a retired mechanic who lived 2 houses down when the kids were little. He'd taught me how to strip paint without ruining the body, how to check timing by ear, how to listen to an engine like it was telling a story. And then one day, he moved away, leaving behind only a memory and the promise that I'd finish that Mustang to perfection. I hadn't heard from him since. Seeing his initials made my stomach twist with a strange mix of nostalgia and panic. What could he possibly want after all these years? And why now? I flipped over the photograph. It showed a dusty old barn with double doors and wild grass growing around it. In the corner, written faintly in pencil, were the words, "It's safe." I didn't know what it was, but I knew I had to find out. The next morning I drove to the address Louis listed, an old farm property just outside town. The road was quiet, lined with familiar pine trees and fading fences. The air felt calm but charged, like the world was holding its breath. The barn looked exactly like the photo. Same wild grass, same worn-out doors, same sense of mystery. I parked, stepped out, and hesitated for a second. Then I pushed open the barn doors. Dust swirled in the sunlight as the hinges creaked. At first, I saw only shadows and old equipment. But then, in the center of the barn, barely covered by a tarp, sat something unmistakable. A car. Not just any car. A 1969 Mustang Boss 429. My heart stopped. This was one of the rarest Mustangs ever made. Only 859 were produced. You didn't just stumble across one. These things were practically holy relics to collectors. I walked toward it slowly, like I was afraid it would disappear. A voice behind me said, "Thought you'd appreciate it." I spun around. Louis stood there, older, much older, his hair white, his posture slightly bent, but his smile was the same. Warm, kind, familiar. "Louis?" I breathed. "In the flesh," he said. "Took you long enough to get here." I laughed shakily. I don't understand. Why is this here? How did you get this?" He stepped closer, brushing his hand along the tarp. "I bought it decades ago, planned to restore it myself. But life had other plans. Then I heard what you'd been doing. Word travels fast in the old car community. You've made a name for yourself, Maggie." My cheeks flushed. "I'm not a professional." He shook his head. "You don't have to be. You've got the heart for it. And that's what matters." I swallowed hard. "Louis, why show this to me now?" He sighed, his eyes softening. "Because I can't restore it anymore. But you can. And I want you to have first chance at it before I offer it to anyone else." My breath caught. "Chance as in to buy it?" He grinned crookedly. "Chance as in take it, for free. Consider it a gift, or a challenge. Or maybe just an old man trying to finish what he started through someone he trusts. My knees almost buckled. Louis, I can't accept that. Yes, you can, he said firmly. You earned it. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The Boss 429 gleamed under the dust like hidden treasure. Then he added softly, and there's something else you should know. That car, it has history connected to you, to your father. I froze. My father? What do you mean? Louis smiled sadly. This isn't just a project car, Maggie. It's part of your family story, one you never heard. My heart pounded louder than any engine I'd ever worked on. And that's when everything changed, again. For a long moment, the only sound in that dusty barn was the soft creaking of the rafters above us. My father who died when I was 19. My father who never once mentioned anything about rare Mustangs or hidden projects. My throat tightened as if the air had thickened. What do you mean this car is connected to my dad? I finally asked. Louis didn't answer right away. Instead, he lowered himself onto an old wooden crate and motioned for me to sit on another. His hands trembled slightly. Age, maybe nerves, but his voice was steady. Your dad loved cars, he began. Not many people knew that. He wasn't the type to talk about his hobbies much. He kept his passions quiet. But he used to come by my shop back when I was still working, asking questions, learning what he could. I blinked. My father? The quiet, reserved man who worked long shifts at the mill and rarely talked about anything beyond bills and weather. I couldn't imagine him leaning over an engine with that faint smile he saved for rare occasions. I had no idea, I whispered. Most people didn't, Louis said. He liked to keep that side of himself private, but he had good instincts and a good ear. He could tell you when a timing belt was off just by listening from 20 feet away. The image felt almost surreal, like hearing your parent had lived a secret life. So what does this car have to do with him? Louis paused, then stood and walked to the Mustang. He lifted the tarp farther, exposing the front grille and the unmistakable Boss 429 hood scoop. Your father bought this, he said quietly, paid for it in cash, said it was going to be his dream project once he had the time. My breath caught. He bought this car, this exact one. Louis nodded. He did, but he got sick before he ever had the chance to work on it. When he passed, well, your mother didn't want anything to do with it. She asked me to take it off her hands so she wouldn't have to think about it. I swallowed hard. My mother had always struggled with grief. She boxed things away, pretended nothing existed if it hurt too much. Knowing she'd quietly let go of this piece of my father wasn't surprising, but it still hit me deep. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Louis looked at me with gentle eyes. Because you were young and hurting. I didn't think you needed one more thing to carry. Then life went on. You married, had kids, moved, and the right moment never came. Until now. My chest tightened, not in a painful way, but in a way that felt like something long buried had suddenly risen to the surface. I rose to my feet and slowly circled the car, brushing my fingertips along the dusty lines. It felt like touching a part of my father I never knew existed, a part he might have shared with me if life had been kinder. He never told me, I murmured. He wanted to, Louis said. He talked about bringing you into the shop with him someday, letting you help, teaching you the things he'd learned. My eyes blurred. He did teach me things, I said softly, but I wish I'd known this. Louis stepped closer, putting a hand on my shoulder. He'd be proud of you, Maggie. You know that, right? All those cars you restored. You did what he never had the chance to do. I nodded, unable to speak. After a while, I took a deep breath and said, "So you're really giving this to me?" Louis chuckled. "I'm not giving it to you. I'm giving it back to you. It should have been yours from the beginning." I didn't argue. I couldn't. Emotion swelled in my chest until I thought it might spill out. We spent the next hour talking, really talking. Louis told me stories about my dad working on engines after long shifts, wiping sweat off his brow with the same stubborn grit I'd always carried. He talked about how my dad used to say, "One day Maggie will love this stuff too." And I wondered how much of my own passion had been passed down without me ever knowing. Eventually, we hooked up the Boss 429 to my trailer. It took effort, careful maneuvering, and a lot of grunting from both of us. But when it was finally secured, I stood there staring at it like it was a treasure map. Louis leaned against the barn door. "You've got the time now, the skill, the patience. I think you're the right person to finish what he started." "Thank you," I said, voice thick, "for everything." He nodded, giving my hand a quick squeeze. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen the engine. It's a mess." I laughed, a shaky, grateful laugh, and then climbed into my truck. As I drove away, the barn shrinking in the rearview mirror, I felt both full and hollow at the same time. Grief and gratitude weaving together like threads of the same fabric. When I arrived home, Jason and Emily were already in the driveway. Emily's jaw dropped. "Whoa, Mum, what is that?" Jason circled the trailer like a detective. "Wait, this is a Boss 429. Where did you get this?" "Long story," I said, wiping my eyes with the back of my sleeve. Jason's eyes widened as realization hit him. "Are you okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, better than okay, actually." They helped me guide the car into the garage, though most of the work was them staring in awe while I steered. Once the garage door closed, the three of us stood there looking at the Mustang like it was some ancient relic. "This is insane," Jason said. "Do you know what this thing could be worth restored?" I shook my head slowly. "Right now, I don't care what it's worth." Emily glanced at me. "So what does this mean? You're starting a new project?" I looked at the car, the one my father bought with hope, the one he never had the chance to touch, the one that somehow found its way back to me after all these years. "Yes," I said. "This is the most important project I'll ever take on." And from that moment, everything in my routine shifted. The next few days felt almost sacred. I cleaned out the garage, rearranged tools, set up lighting. I felt like I was preparing a studio for a masterpiece. Jason helped me bring in a new engine hoist. Emily brought snacks and moral support, which honestly mattered more than she realized. One night, as I sat alone in the garage with a cup of tea, I turned on the radio and slowly lifted the Boss 429's hood. The engine bay was a disaster. Wires hanging loose, bolts rusted, hoses brittle. But beneath all that decay, I saw beauty, potential, just like I always did. More than that, I saw my father in every hidden detail. I imagined him buying this car, running his hand along the fender, making plans. Maybe he dreamed of showing it to me one day. Maybe he thought he'd teach me how to rebuild it, how to listen to the engine, how to trust my hands. Tears pricked my eyes. I whispered, "I'll finish it, Dad. I promise." And for the first time in years, I felt him there with me, not in a ghostly way, but in the quiet recognition that some connections never fade. But the deeper I got into the project, the more I realized this restoration wasn't just going to test my skills, it was going to test everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and myself. Because 2 weeks later, something happened that none of us, me, the kids, or even Louis, saw coming. And it started with a knock on my door. I didn't expect the house to feel so quiet after the whole fiasco with my family. You'd think a woman my age would welcome quiet, but silence always has a way of reminding you of unfinished conversations. After the collector bought the Mustang for 200 grand, right in front of my children and grandchildren, they scattered like someone had set off a firecracker under their chairs. At first, the quiet felt like a relief, but by the next morning, with my coffee cup still warm between my palms, I started replaying every expression I saw on their faces. Shock, embarrassment, regret. Maybe even a little fear that the woman they'd underestimated all their lives wasn't the version of me they preferred to keep in their heads. I didn't feel guilty, exactly, but I did feel unsettled. It's a strange sensation, knowing you finally stood up for yourself after decades of letting things slide. My hands kept shaking even when I wasn't thinking about the money. It wasn't the cash that rattled me. It was the realization that I'd spent years allowing people who loved me to shrink me into a smaller version of myself. And now that I had peeled back the edges of that box, I wasn't sure if I recognized the woman stepping out. I liked her, though. She felt lighter, sharper, more in control. It was a good feeling, but an unfamiliar one, like putting on a jacket from a decade ago and finding out it still fits better than you expected. I didn't hear from any of them that day. Not a text, not a call. Part of me suspected they were waiting for me to reach out first, to soften the situation like I always did. But I didn't. Instead, I walked out to the garage, breathing in the smell of old metal and grease that always seemed to calm my nerves. The remaining cars sat silently, the way loyal animals do when they know something's off with their owner. I ran my hand over the hood of the old Chevy, the one I had planned to restore next. For years, working on these cars had been my escape. Now they felt like something more, my identity unfolding in its truest form. Around noon, I finally heard my phone buzz. It was my eldest daughter, Linda. The message wasn't anything warm, just 3 words: "We need to talk." I stared at it for a long moment, thumb hovering but unwilling to reply. Instead, I let the phone sit face down on the workbench while I rolled up my sleeves and got back to cleaning carburetor parts. There's something grounding about working with your hands, especially when emotions run hot. I needed that grounding more than I needed another argument. It wasn't until evening that I felt ready to call her back. When she picked up, her voice was stiff, formal, like she was talking to a stranger instead of her mother. She started with the usual: how shocked they all were, how they couldn't believe I hadn't told them the car was worth so much, how they felt blindsided watching someone pull out a briefcase of cash like they were in a movie. I let her say everything without interrupting. When she finally fell quiet, she waited for me to fill the silence the way I always did. But this time, I didn't rush. "Linda," I finally said, "I didn't hide anything from you. You just never asked. Every time I talked about cars, you brushed it aside like a silly hobby. You never wanted to hear how much work I put into them, or how valuable restoration really is. So I stopped trying." She didn't like hearing that. I could tell by the way her breath got tight. She tried steering the conversation toward inheritance again, something I thought we'd put to bed by now. But the thing about some people is, They panic when they think they're losing control. And my children, bless them, had grown very comfortable assuming I'd always be predictable. "Mum," she said, a sigh pushing through her words, "we just want to make sure everything is handled. You're not getting any younger and—" I cut her off. "And what? That I should start handing out pieces of my life like party favors before I'm even gone?" She went silent. I could almost hear her blinking through the phone. For once, I wasn't angry. I wasn't emotional. I was steady, calm. "I'm not dying," I said. "And even if I were, my belongings are not owed to anyone. I'll leave what I want to leave, to whomever I want, and I'll enjoy my life while I have it. I earned that right." Something softened in her voice after that, like she finally heard me, not just my words, but the years packed behind them. She apologized, in her own awkward way. I accepted it. Healing doesn't always need fireworks. Sometimes it's just a quiet acknowledgement that someone finally sees you. After we hung up, I brewed myself some chamomile tea and sat on the porch watching the sun sink below the trees. That's when my son, Mark, texted. His message was surprisingly sweet, nothing like the defensiveness he'd shown the day before. He said he admired my dedication and wished he'd paid more attention. He said he was proud. I reread that message 3 times. It was the first time in decades he'd said something like that to me. By the next week, the tension started to ease. My grandkids asked if they could come over and learn cars with me, which made me smile in a way I hadn't smiled in a long time. I said yes, of course, because teaching them felt like passing down something far more meaningful than any inheritance. It wasn't the money, or the car, or even the restored Mustang. It was the idea that passion matters, craft matters, that a person can find purpose in unexpected places. A week later, I got another message, but not from my family. It was from the collector who bought the Mustang. He sent a photo showing the car shining under showroom lights, freshly polished, looking almost unreal. He told me he'd love to buy more restorations from me if I ever felt like selling. I laughed when I read that, shaking my head. Imagine that. After years of everyone treating my hobby like a joke, someone out there saw real value in what I did with my hands in that quiet garage. I didn't say yes immediately. I wanted to think about it. But the idea of starting something new so late in life felt thrilling, like the world had cracked open in a way I didn't expect. I'd always heard that life closes in on you as you age, that opportunities shrink, that your world becomes smaller. But here I was, feeling like someone had just handed me a brand new map. A few days later, my entire family came over for dinner. I was nervous. I won't pretend otherwise. But it turned out better than I feared. They brought dessert, real heartfelt conversations, and even a few apologies. We ate, laughed, talked about everything we'd missed. And for once, nobody made jokes about my garage. In fact, my youngest granddaughter asked if she could help me paint the Chevy doors next weekend. I could have cried. Throughout dinner, I kept thinking about the moment they realized who I truly was, when I made that collector an offer and he accepted, counting out $200,000 right in front of them. That moment didn't just change the way they saw me, it changed the way I saw myself. I'd spent so many years being the glue, the caretaker, the soft corner everyone leaned on. I didn't realize I'd let them forget that underneath all that softness was a woman who built things, fixed things, created things with patience and precision. A woman who could turn rust into beauty. A woman who could surprise them. By the time everyone left that night, the house felt warm again. Not quiet in a lonely way, but peaceful, full. like the silence finally belonged to me instead of reminding me of everything I hadn't said. Later, I walked out to the garage one more time, flipping on the lights so I could admire the Chevy waiting for me. I imagined teaching my grandkids how to sand old paint, how to check an engine, how to listen for the clinks and taps that tell you what a machine needs. I thought about maybe selling another car someday, or maybe keeping them all. It didn't really matter. What mattered was that for the first time in a long while, the life in front of me felt bigger than the life behind me. My family saw me differently now, not as a woman wasting her days tinkering in a garage, but as someone with skill, passion, and a mind sharp enough to rebuild the things life tries to break. And me, I saw myself differently too. Turns out, it's never too late to surprise people. Or yourself.